isn't one agreed upon answer about what an ESG fund is. What we've found through our research and experience is that people tend to think about ESG funds in one of three different ways. The first way would be as a fund that makes ESG investments. But the problem with that is it's not agreed upon what is an ESG investment. The second way that people think about it is as a fund that does good for people on the planet. But again, there isn't really agreement about what sort of criteria constitutes good for people or the planet. And the last way that people might think about an ESG fund is as one that uses ESG information in any way, in any shape or form, or to any extent to achieve its objectives. About a year ago, CFA Institute did a research report on greenwashing where we looked at 60 funds to try and answer this question. And we did not find a lot of problems with disclosures or the information provided by a fund, other than it wasn't always exactly clear. Some of the information was ambiguous or confusing. What I think is probably the biggest problem is that investors have some sort of characteristics in their mind. They want to buy, for example, a fund that is sustainable, and they have a concept in their mind of maybe what that looks like, but not a very clear concept. And so funds respond to this demand by making new products, and they need to decide what sort of features this product will have. Maybe we'll have some exclusions, maybe we'll invest in certain industries or sectors. And then they put a name on the fund, like they'll call it something like the XYZ Sustainability Fund. And then investors look at that fund and they see the word sustainability, and that forms an expectation that's very close to what they already had in mind. But then when they dig into the details, they find out, well, it's not exactly what they thought it would be. And when it's less than what they thought it should be, then they feel like the fund is greenwashing and that there should be higher standards for funds to use words like sustainability or green in their name or in their marketing. But I think a lot of it probably comes down to a misalignment of expectations and a lack of common and agreed upon standards. Yeah, so in the paper we just released, How to Build a Better ESG Classification System, we proposed three features that a fund might have. Now, these are not mutually exclusive features. The first one is using ESG information in a risk-return oriented investment process. And ESG information is simply just information about the environment, society, or governance. It could be things like climate temperature change. It could be the company's carbon footprint. It could be the board's governance processes. So that's the first feature, is just using that information to make better investment decisions. The second feature is when a fund would take a position on ESG issues and write that position into their policies. For example, they would always vote against a board of directors that does not have a net zero transition plan. And the last feature would be an objective that explicitly states that the fund is trying to achieve some sort of real world environmental or social outcome. Now, again, those are not mutually exclusive, so a fund could have one or more of those features. And then the trick becomes, well, how do you group those features such that you can create understandable and useful categories for market participants? And we do that in the paper as well. And we don't offer just one system, we offer several types or versions of classifications, and we explain why these different versions might be useful to different types of market participants. We would love to see the regulations become clearer and more precise. One of the big problems that we found with existing regulations is that when they define terms like an like ESG fund or sustainable investment, those definitions are not as precise as they need to be. And when the marketplace doesn't have the precision they need, it creates a lot of or a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace, because firms then don't know if the products they offer actually trigger certain requirements, and they have to then make their own determinations, which puts them at some regulatory or compliance risk. And at the same time, there's just a lot of confusion then on the part of investors. And so if regulators are going to make rules, for example, disclosure rules of the form, if the fund has this sort of policy, or if the fund does XYZ, then it must disclose this information. Well, then the criteria has to be clear so that everybody can agree that a fund either does or does not meet that regulatory criteria, and thus does or does not have to, say, provide the disclosure. And it's similar for not only disclosures, but maybe other types of regulatory rules, such as the sorts of words a fund might use in its name. So all in all, we just hope that regulators will read this paper and understand that classifying funds is actually quite difficult. But in this paper, we hope that they find some good ideas and recognize that the rulemaking requires rigor and precision. We've had to be very careful about not defaulting to easy but not well-defined terms like an ESG fund or a sustainable fund. What does that really mean? And that's part of the problem, is our language. Is, for example, if we say, this person is a tall person. Conceptually, we know what we're talking about, but when it comes down to trying to sort a group of people into two groups, tall and not tall, you and I may disagree and sort people in different ways. And that's the same sort of problem that we have here. And at some point, it's not useful to say tall anymore, because that's some sort of subjective determination. We would really have to agree on an underlying technical standard, like, well, we'll everybody under 2 meters will put in one group, and everybody over 2 meters will put in another group. So that is also part of the problem, is just the language. And in this paper, we avoided the problem of language by using just generic names for these different groups. Instead of calling people tall or not tall, which might be subjective and maybe even pejorative in some ways to some people, we could just call them Group A and Group B. And that might be something else that we need to do in the marketplace, is just choose less descriptive terms for these groups just to get into the right place. And then once we're in the right place, we know that we're really conceptually aligned and talking about the same thing, then maybe we can relax that. I'll answer this question first with respect to disclosures. So as I said, the definitions that underpin Article 8 and Article 9 disclosures need to be more precise and more clear. But in addition to that, I think that SFDR requires too many technical disclosures for the average retail investor, and that it should be streamlined and simplified. I would recommend that the European Union and the regulators follow the lead of the UK regulators. And if their goal is to try and make it easy for retail investors to select a sustainable fund, then first they need to develop a standard about what sustainability looks like in the context of an investment fund. And then they should provide a label that when a fund does indeed meet those criteria, that the fund can carry some sort of easily identifiable mark that makes it easy for the average retail investor to quickly determine whether a fund meets those standards or does not. I think we probably need to realize that investors, their knowledge and abilities span a very wide spectrum. So at one end, I would say that sophisticated professional investors, for example, asset owners, pension funds, investment consultants, who spend their days in and out evaluating different investment strategies and funds, generally can identify the funds that meet their needs and preferences. Although it is hard because the information needed to do that evaluation is often spread across multiple documents and buried in many, many pages of documents that are essentially written by lawyers. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have retail investors who may have very little background knowledge and information about investing. And in that case, I think more information and education would be helpful, but we should be cognizant that retail investors don't have the time and expertise to do this sort of evaluation. And that's where I think this easily identifiable mark that's backed by a standard and an authoritative body would make it much easier for retail investors then to identify and select the types of products that they want to. Well, I can't say, yeah, no, I can't recommend any specific
Yeah,
funds,
I know, I know.
of course, but, and also everybody has their own needs and preferences. But I will say that in our paper, How to Build a Better ESG Classification System, we did 3 case studies where
Mhm.
we applied the criteria that we developed in the paper to three funds, excuse me, and
Mhm.
identified the features of those funds and then how they would be grouped according to different grouping schemes. So it might be helpful to look at that as well as the guidance that we provide in the paper for how to do this sort of classification in practice. That would be helpful for people who need to essentially determine what sort of fund might be suitable for a particular investment with particular investment needs and preferences.